Hello everybody and welcome to another hobby cheating video, and today we are going to be talking about blonde hair. And so blonde hair, of course, is can be often very challenging. There's a lot of different types of blondes, and we're going to walk through it today. So, you know, if we're going to do blonde hair, of course, the first thing we want to do is we want to grab our brightest yellow possible. No, I'm just kidding. Get rid of that garbage. Get it out of here. That's number one. The number one place I see people go wrong with blonde hair is they go for that bright yellow paint. Blonde hair is not yellow. Say it with me. Blonde hair is not yellow. Now, if you're doing like a chibi or something, or you want a cartoon look, sure, go ahead. If you're trying to paint Sailor Moon, then blonde hair is yellow. But for anything we're trying to do here with miniatures, it's not. Okay? So what I did here, like, this hair looks fairly blonde. Okay? Even right now. Now we're going to paint this. But all I did to get to this point, okay, all this is right here that you're looking at is my normal zenithal highlighting that you can see from my zenithal highlighting video, literally covered with one thin layer of Seraphim Sepia. One controlled thin layer. This is the result. And the reason I'm starting from this is, one, I wanted to color shift it towards brown and get rid of some of the black before I put on the other paints. But two, to show that blonde hair, and there's a lot of big range of it, from strawberry blonde, which tends to be infused with more reds, to a very dark ruddy blonde, which tends to have more brown, to very bleached blonde, platinum blonde. It's all over the shop, okay? But the point is that whatever blonde you're working on, okay, whatever blonde you're working on, whatever type, it doesn't contain yellow. It does contain a lot of browns and a fair amount of whites. Okay? All right. So let's talk about some colors. There's a lot of different choices out there that'll work just fine. I particularly like a combination of these two, which is, I've played around with a lot of different combinations, but Game Color Plague Brown and Reaper Ashen Brown. It's just a really interesting sort of desaturated gray brown. I like how the two work together. Most of the time when you're doing blonde hair, you just need to find some mid-tone like this. I know Rucksack Tan is very popular as a base. There's sort of a lot in that sort of range. Like Old Snakebite Leather, I think, was another one that was very popular as a base. Basically, something in the very brown ochre or ochre range, like really, really. So not yellow, right? But, you know, the difference between yellow and ochre is pretty striking. Like, here's a heavy ochre from Vallejo. Compare that to the yellow. Look at the difference there. Okay? I know it's color shifting all over the place because it's trying to color balance that, but there you go. All right. So these are the two I'm going to use today. You can use whatever you want. Beyond that, honestly, the next two things you're going to use are basically a white and a gray-black or a black or something like that. Now, we can get more creative, we can get more clever with it, but really, all we need to focus on is a white and a black. Hair has a sheen to it, very naturally. So if you go look at your box of hair dye sitting on the shelf at, you know, at the grocery store or whatever, those are pretty perfected photoshopped hair, but the point is it will map to you where the sheen lines are, and it tends to be the sort of thing where hair has very significant highlights, almost like metal. The difference is it doesn't have the sharp points. The highlights tend to be more diffuse, more spread out. So that's where that is. Now the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead. So we're going to highlight and low light with just white and dark gray. I was just prepping my paints over off camera. So we're going to start with a nice mix of these two, about 2 to 1. Something like that. Maybe even 3 to 1. Getting to a color I like. It's not an exact ratio. So the point is, grab your ochre-ish color, your Rucksack Tan, your Snakebite Leather, your actual ochre, whatever you like. If you like that base, that's fine. If you want to go for something brighter blonde, you can actually just go straight from the ochre, darken it down. If you want to make it a little more brown-infused hair, then you can add some desaturated browns or ruddy browns. The rust colors from Vallejo are good additions for your low lights, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so now what we've got is we've got a color that looks a little bit like that, and you see how thin that is. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and run that over the hair here. Now, I'm not going to paint every bit of this, because we'll be here for a while. I love these Sisters of Sigmar models. They're some of my favorite of all time. Still trying to get my hands on a few more of them. They're maybe some of my favorite models that have ever been produced. Okay. I'm just going to do enough here that we have something to work with on camera. Okay. All right, so there. So now we've got a nice base. And as you can see, I mean, just that paint I was working in was pretty thin. Again, because I want to use the wash that I did beforehand to add a little shadow, stuff like that. But now what I'm going to do, okay, is I'm going to start working in some other colors. Now, I've still got the darker brown separate on my palette. I didn't just mix them straight in. But then I'm also going to put just a little bit of the black and white on my palette, okay? And what we're going to do from here, I've already got the white. Okay, what we're going to do from here is we're going to kind of sketch in some of the colors. So the first thing I'm going to do is take my existing mix here that I've got. And I'm going to mix in a little bit of that black. Not a lot. This isn't black hair. It's blonde. And we want a very minimal amount of that black in there. Okay? So let me show you my palette here so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. See if we can actually get that to show up. There we go. So there's my brown and ochre, and then you can see how much of this black I'm just slowly pulling in a little bit to darken it. Okay. So, test looks good. Okay, so what I want to do now is get in these darker parts. So we want to get down the very crown of the hair here. Right? In this center line. I want to create that shadow. And again, the zenithal, because we started with that and then we washed, it's going to do a lot of the work for us. We want to just push in some shadows, probably the underside of these braids, right up against the head. Okay. Okay. So you can see now how we've got some darker shadows in there. Where blonde hair really comes together, honestly, isn't in the shadows. Shadows are fairly boring. Where blonde hair comes together is in the highlights. And to do that, we're just going to take our white, and we're going to kind of mix in some of it here. We're going to create a nice little spread on the palette. Okay. Now, one thing I don't recommend doing ever is dry brushing hair. I know this has texture and looks like it would be ready for a dry brush. The problem that is you're going to chalk it almost immediately. And moreover, you want to be controlled with where you're placing these highlights. Because what we want to do is create the actual spots where the light is going to hit the hair and that sheen is going to happen. Okay? So I'm using the side of the brush, you'll notice very carefully here, to sketch in this highlight around the crown of the head, right? I'm also going to hit kind of the whole front because we tend to expect that to be highlighted. If you ever look at somebody with bangs, the bangs are thinner and so more light tends to filter through them. So there you go. Now you can see how we've got the first little highlight in there. Now we're going to move up, bring in a little more white. And then in a smaller area than what I just did, I'm going to go ahead and create a little light catch, right? So you can see how we get that sheen. Now, if you over-highlight or anything, if you take it up too bright, first of all, blonde hair has a lot of range to it, so you can have blonde hair that has a large amount of white in it, or some that doesn't have much at all, but it's going to be fairly reflective. You just want to make sure the real key isn't your overall tone, it's mapping the light points correctly. Blonde hair tends to be very reflective, and so basically more than any other hair except black, you have to really carefully map your reflection points. We'll handle black hair in a future episode. Okay. So now, realistically, we're good. I mean, we could stop right there if we wanted, right? You can see how we have that wonderful sheen on the side of her head that looks like we're going from the crown of the head to this highlight and then down into the darker color. But of course, we can keep pushing this around if we want, right? It's really just a question of how much you want to work on it. Because at this point, we can get into our thin glaze territory and start very carefully going between pushing our shadows, right? Really, really push that contrast. And doing that can make the highlights seem brighter. Okay? We can also try to pull in a little more of just the mid-tone. If your highlights up to the white aren't as smooth as you want, then we pull in a little bit of the mid-tone and we just smooth out the edge. Right? So we're going back to our original sort of plague brown, ashen brown mix. And again, very carefully, we don't have a lot of paint on the brush, just with the side of the brush. I'm going in and I'm hitting my mid spots to smooth everything out. Okay? Because what we want is a nice, soft transition. That's the key. Okay. And that's basically it. That's blonde hair. It's pretty straightforward. You can see now how she looks. She's got this wonderful little reflection point. You know, her hair has that wonderful sheen like the front of a hair dye box, which, you know, is going to make it pop from a distance. As I said, you can keep playing with it. You know, depending on what level I was trying to take this model to, I might push it a little more. You know, I might push some of the highlights around, really control the directionality of it, that kind of thing, just to get it exactly where I want as far as the progression between the highlights and the midtones and the lowlights. But, so, what are our keys for blonde hair? All right, number one, get rid of that yellow paint. You do not paint blonde hair with yellow paint. Number two, there's lots of variations on blonde. Most of them are going to involve some kind of either like an ochre color or an ochre brown, or just even a very light, thin brown like you saw at the beginning with Seraphim Sepia. Okay? We tend to mix straight from one color. That is to say, we take whatever our color is, we go up, mixing in just a little bit of white to push the highlights, and the highlights need to follow the reflection points. Again, just Google like your hair dye boxes, you'll see what I mean. And we want to build in our shadows, especially near the crown of the head, and then in any recessed areas here, because blonde hair, especially where it's very bright, it has a lot of contrast. It needs to have those rich shadows in going up to the highlights, but it's very quick and simple. And if you over highlight at any point or don't feel like you have a smooth transition, you can just go back to your mid-tone and smooth it all out. So there you go. There's some nice blonde hair. We'll include a picture at the end, but I hope you enjoy. As always, I appreciate you watching. Give it a like if you like it. Subscribe for more hobby cheating in the future. And as always, share it if you find it useful or you think there's other people who want to see it. Sharing it is always the coolest and nicest thing you can do. I really do appreciate that. And as always, see you next time.